I surrender. A moment of silence fell around, a sense of disbelief appeared in the Hindu pantheon, and even some of Victor's wives raised their eyebrows in surprise. N/O/vel/b/jn.c/c/c/om. The reason? The arrogance of the gods was well known. Even when faced with a power far above their own, they would rather die than submit. God kings took this level of arrogance to a whole new level. They would never want to give up their power. It was an attitude that Victor truly understood. After all, just imagining himself surrendering to another being provoked an infinite wave of disgust. He would rather fight to the death than that, or at least, his proud side would. His logical and emotional side would assess the situation. If the situation was dire, and he couldn't handle it even with all this strength now, he would prioritize his family's safety. And then press the nuke button, meaning he would stop holding his nightmare form back entirely. He had several ways to seal his inner world in a completely protected dimension that was utterly disconnected from the system and from this cosmology. It was a precaution against beings like the primordials, who could go anywhere as long as they had a connection with them. Victor was very paranoid, and because of that, he always made plans on top of plans. Because if one plan failed, at least he would have another. With his mind working like a quantum supercomputer, formulating several plans in a short time was as easy as breathing. Very well. From today onwards, the Hindu pantheon will be a part of the empire. All gods, resources, history, and territory must be annexed to the empire. Victor raised his hand, and the leviathans in the sky disappeared, as did the portals that housed Victor's forces. Your treatment will be the same as that of the Shinto pantheon. You may maintain your self-governance, but you must report to the empire when called upon. A preventative treatment, after all, there will be time to re-educate you. Victor thought. Victor glanced briefly at Callie. You can stand down now. Huh? Callie was confused, but her confusion didn't last long when she felt a woman near behind her. Yes, Nyx, wearing a full black leotard that highlighted her figure, spoke while making a V sign with both hands. Callie felt a chill when she saw that an enemy had been so close to her, and she hadn't felt anything. This chill became even more prominent when she saw the dagger in Nyx's hand. That dagger was extremely dangerous, and all her instincts screamed at her to distance herself from it. So, it was no wonder she quickly moved away from Nyx. You too. Victor looked at Shiva. Shiva obviously knew that the Emperor was not talking to him, and this thought was proven correct when someone stepped out of his shadow, and just like Nyx, this woman was also carrying a very dangerous dagger. Just what in the name of the seven hells is this? Why is this giving me a horrible feeling? Shiva thought. He couldn't help but imagine the scenario that if he had taken a hostile action at that moment, he would have been immediately eliminated or possibly sealed away to be used for whatever nefarious plan the Emperor had. It was checkmate from the very beginning. Callie thought as she saw this situation. When the Emperor decided to move, nothing escaped his grasp. Rejoice, Shiva, Callie. You have been given the privilege of the treatment of the strong. Because of you too, this place will not suffer a fate like that of Celtic pantheon. Victor raised his hand, and an image of the current Celtic pantheon was shown. The entire territory was destroyed, and the gods were dead on the ground or being chained. It was a sight of what one would expect when a country fell. The ones responsible for all of this were three women in the sky of the pantheon, and judging by the violet crown of power on the white-haired woman's head, she was the Dragon Empress, Violet Elderblood. The eyes of said Empress glowed slightly violet, and soon, she looked towards the image and smiled slightly as she waved. Victor couldn't help but roll his eyes internally. I told her to act like a ruthless ruler, and she does that. He thought in amusement, not bothered by her small gesture. He even liked it, to be honest. But Victor's expression didn't change at all, his face remained as stoic as stone. Callie and Shiva didn't say anything, and they immediately understood why Victor had done all these small actions until now. Was a display of power. By revealing the assassins that they didn't even sense carrying dangerous weapons that they didn't even know what they were, and by revealing the state of the Celtic pantheon, even that casual display by the Empress. All of this was a power play planned by the Emperor. He was basically saying, see? I can kill them easily. He was reinforcing the point he was making before, the same point that made Shiva completely give up on fighting back. If possible, I wanted to make an alliance like the Heavenly Father did with Victor earlier, but I took too long. I was arrogant, and I paid for it. Shiva sighed. This outcome wasn't bad, but it was not favorable for them either. Well, I guess I should be glad that I just survived another day. I'll send a representative who will help you integrate with the Empire smoothly. Treat him with respect. Victor turned, making his miasma-formed cloak billow, and stepped into the abyss between dimensions. The heralds, Kagaya, and Nyx stared at the two gods for a few seconds, then followed. Victor. I hope this was the right choice. Shiva sighed. Shiva, we had no choice from the beginning. This is the fate of the weak. Callie shook her head as she walked towards her temple. I will rest. Today was a stressful day. She sighed and then disappeared. Fate of the weak, huh? I spent so long being the strongest that I never learned this feeling. The feeling of helplessness in the face of overwhelming strength. Cracking sounds were heard as Shiva clenched his fist. It doesn't feel good. Shiva, for the first time since being born as a primordial god, suffered a crushing and hopeless defeat. First year of the imperial calendar. Just a few years after the Day of Judgment that brought humanity to the brink of extinction because of the demons, the Demon King, the successor of the demon that invaded humanity, ascended as emperor of several pantheons, and less than a few months later, this same emperor ascended as the emperor of humanity. Annexing not only all the pantheons into the empire but also all the supernatural races on Earth, no being was spared. All the races in hiding, all the races on the verge of extinction, absolutely everything was annexed into the empire. This day marked a new milestone in history and also the change of many things. This day was the day the imperial calendar was born, and the years from now on will be counted from this day. On the first day as the emperor of humanity, Victor Elderblood united all the continents into one great continent. From today onwards, there were no more borders, no more language barriers. There was only the empire and the official imperial language that was placed in the minds of all sentient beings by Victor, an entirely new language created by him. You could speak English to someone, but the sound that would come out of your mouth would be completely different. On that day, a wave of confusion spread throughout everyone. Everyone tried to get used to the different words that came out of their mouths. Some adapted faster, and others took a little longer. Eventually, everyone would get used to it, and it would become the primary language. On the same day, Earth was renamed in honor of its protector, Yggdrasil, the world tree that had nourished Earth until now. On that same day, the Emperor of Humanity erected a gigantic tower right in the middle of the continent, and with a snap of his fingers, a great imperial city was created. The tower that stood in the middle of the imperial capital and could be seen from even several kilometers away was called the Tower of Challenges, Babylon, a tower with 999 floors, a place for beings to challenge themselves to become stronger. The tower was the perfect training ground for everything from monsters to fighting gods. Theoretically, if you reached the 999th floor, you would already be at the level where you could fight a primordial god. The tower was made to create powerful warriors and scholars. After all, the empire did not survive on soldiers alone. Scientists, doctors, and engineers were all necessary for the development of the empire. The tower could only be accessed by those who entered the Imperial Academy as cadets to become soldiers or scholars of the empire. Young people who had grown up in the former modern era immediately recognized the purpose of the tower. Just like RPG games or fighting games, this was a tower where each floor became more difficult. By killing monsters, even if you were a mediocre human, you would become stronger and gain power. The thirst for power of the weak, who had no connection to the gods immediately, made them register themselves as cadets and entered the tower in search of strength. Many died in the beginning, but those who adapted gained superhuman powers, and upon seeing the success of those who rose, they persisted. If there was one thing humanity was good at, it was being greedy and envious. And that was okay. These emotions were what drove their evolution. Unlike his elite soldiers, who were created through the clones of his 7 creations, Victor did not revive the people who died in the tower. He had 3 reasons for this. First, the consequence of death was a great motivator for making beings not make mistakes. Second, only the elite, fighting in the most difficult missions where the mortality rate was very high, would receive this type of privilege. Third, it was to efficiently create a system of life and death. Death should not be feared. It should be worshipped. When they died, everyone would know that they would be in the hands of the God Emperor and would be reincarnated. Heaven should be sought after so that, even in death, they would not feel sad. After all, they would be with the Emperor. The Emperor's soldiers, the Dragonoids, were warriors genetically modified to be superior and to serve the Empire. The rules of hell had also been changed. From today onwards, the most heinous crime in the Empire was treason against the Emperor. The crime of treason would immediately sentence you to a direct passage to the deepest pits of hell, and your soul would never find peace, only eternal torment. Of course, Victor had not changed his ideology. The abuse of minors, whether they were boys or girls, was also a heinous crime. Non-consensual forced advances on both sexes were also a heinous crime. Experimentation on the citizens of the Empire was also a heinous crime. Racial prejudice also fell into this category due to having so many different races in one place. Races that, until then, had grudges against each other. No matter if you were a demon, angel, werewolf, vampire, or witch, you are a citizen of the Empire, and as a citizen of the Empire, you must be treated with respect. Assassinations and internal conflicts had another type of law that would be applied only by the executors of the Emperor's will, soldiers whose sole function was to deal with the affairs of the Empire. They cannot be corrupted because they were created through clones, they cannot be bribed because their faith lay in the Emperor, and they already had the best benefits. They possessed a set of powers that helped them see through falsehoods, sense the emotions of individuals, and minor power of telepathy, capable of allowing the user to read the mind of the offender. They were the perfect law enforcement officers created to maintain order in the Empire. Of course, these agents were just the surface ones. There were several other forces of the Emperor at play, but the public didn't need to know that. On the second day of Victor's reign as the Emperor of Humanity, the currency called null, which already existed in Hell, was introduced as the common currency, and the entire monetary system was reformulated so that this currency would be used throughout imperial territory. The null was like a dollar, but conversions could not be made. If you were a billionaire in dollars before, none of that mattered. Everyone would start from scratch, and only those who helped the Empire before would have a total of 30,000 null to start over. Several imperial academies were created throughout the territory to welcome future generations, and these academies welcomed students from the ages of 6 to 24. Exceptional students, or geniuses, would be taken from the normal students and would be moved to a special program focused entirely on developing their talent. The entire education system of the past was thrown in the trash and completely revamped to suit many different races. The grading system was also thrown in the trash because it only made students seek grades, not knowledge itself, which just made them mindless workers. A new knowledge system was implemented, and in this system, students were evaluated according to their knowledge. From elementary school to high school, there was a knowledge ceiling that all students needed to achieve, and they could only advance to the next year if they demonstrated having learned all the necessary knowledge. The future was with the younger generation, and Victor understood this. So, to implement his ideologies, he needed to start with the young, and having young people of many different races attend the same environment would solve most of these problems. By implementing this new knowledge system, students would be more knowledgeable than most. By implementing the genius program, they would separate the diamonds from the trash. Due to the importance of the youth for the future, the entire academic system of the empire as a whole was placed in the hands of the emperor's wives, specifically, Hestia, the dragon goddess of the home, and Métis, the dragon goddess of wisdom. To facilitate the travel of so many people, teleportation portals were spread at key points throughout the empire. This system would connect the entire territory of the empire in all dimensions and planets. Do you want to visit one of the cities of hell or some planet conquered by the emperor? Just pay a few null and be there in the blink of an eye. Travel between the emperor's territory was expensive, ranging from 500 to 50,000 null, depending on the location and distances. Travel between galaxies in the future would be even more expensive, but this value would decrease depending on the traveler's level of contribution to society and their loyalty. You could get up to 99% discount, making it almost free. The empire had no shortage of resources, and Victor could easily create more of them, so they were not concerned with profit but with developing the mentality of being loyal, showing results, working for the empire, and being rewarded. Effort we no longer niles any it unhafora and thera ume no nanatism absent for. The emperor's family. Everyone was equal before the empire, and what made you different was your level of competence. Dissatisfied? Be better, the empire offers a wide range of tools to improve. There was no room for beings who just complained and wanted everything to be given to them for free in the empire. On that day, there were several changes that covered all spheres of the empire, including reforms, and the creation of temples of the religion of the blood god that spoke of all the gods, and about the emperor more deeply. In the end, these were just basic things that were common knowledge for the most important beings in this world but were unknown to others. Knowing that the emperor had once been a human and that he'd become so strong with just effort, talent, and luck was incredible. Of course, some parts were romanticized, especially when it spoke of the goddesses who were the emperor's wives. For example, a good portion of the backstories of Violet, Agnes, and Natasha needed to undergo slight changes that were consistent with the real information, mixing truths with lies. This was necessary, considering that the women in the past were quite intense. This rapprochement between gods and mortals had an effect. The gods are watching us, and death is no longer a mystery. If you died, you now knew for a fact where you would go. In the temple, there was an illustrated holographic board that showed everything that occurred when you died. If you were bad, you would go to hell, and if you were good, you would go to heaven. What defined good and evil were created by the strong. This was a good example of that, and Victor completely capitalized on the mortal's fear of death. Oh yes, he completely ignored the primordial system, and ensured that all his people would go directly to an afterlife on his terms. No more souls would be going to the primordial of souls. Will he be upset? Tell him to talk to Jean's brother. Victor didn't care anymore. Not to mention that doing this now was not a problem. After all, compared to all the sectors, the percentage of souls that Victor was taking did not even reach 0.00020% of all sentient souls in the universe. The High Priestess was doing a masterful job of converting new believers. However, they were still not as trustworthy as the old believers who immediately gained benefits in the new empire. All those who had contributed before had already gained level 3 citizenship, which gave them a lot of benefits. Citizenship levels showed how much you had contributed to the empire, with the maximum level being 7, which gave countless benefits. At level 7, you got practically everything for free in the empire due to discounts, except for special things like civilian spaceships, new technologies, new weapons, new armor, etc. Which, even with discounts, were still expensive. Everyone in the empire had the right to carry a weapon to defend themselves. After all, Victor was the god of martial honor, so he would not take this right away from anyone. Any weapon purchased in the emperor's territory was automatically registered by the numerous artificial intelligences that Akasha controlled. He who raises a weapon towards another must be prepared to suffer the consequences of that action. This warning was given to all individuals who purchased weapons of any kind. After all, owning a weapon was a responsibility that few were truly willing to shoulder. On the third day, a shock occurred throughout the empire. The introduction of the Healing chamber. From today on, the weaker races no longer needed to fear the loss of limbs, strange diseases, or even genetic defects. All of this could be solved with this healing chamber. It was a miraculous technology. And at the same time expensive. This was intentional so that beings would not lose their fear of getting hurt. The healing chamber was to be used as a last resort. After all, the Empire's medical technology was outstanding. Victor understood very well that the consequences of actions should not be minimized. Only in this way would these individuals become good warriors. By being afraid of getting hurt and being immobilized in a battle, you learn to dodge and defend. By being afraid of dying, you feel the desire to fight and overcome obstacles. Losing fear was losing the will to live. As the god of fear, Victor understood this very well. There was a good reason why. Fear was one of the oldest emotions of all beings. It was a great motivator. Even with the discounts of the citizenship level, the healing chamber was still expensive. After all, this technology allowed you to bring someone back from the brink of death even if they were missing arms, legs, and parts of their internal organs. As long as the soul was in the body, they would be cured. Several laws regarding this item were put in place. For example, in times of war, the money charged for using these items on warriors was significantly reduced. Regulations on how many uses a person could have of the chamber were also applied. The use limit was 1 per year, and in times of war, the limit would be raised to 3. For ordinary people, this meant that they would have one chance of not dying, and even if they got into debt for it, it was better than if they had died. Some immediately wanted to use the healing chamber. Even if they got into debt, they wouldn't care, but it wasn't necessary. On that day, everyone who had any problems with their bodies were completely restored, but it was not done through using the healing chamber, but by one of the emperor's wives, Jean Elderblood. She simply appeared in the sky above the imperial capital, and used mass healing that covered the entire empire. On that day, everyone who was sick, disabled, or weak was reborn completely healthy. Be grateful for the emperor's kindness. These were her last words before disappearing into the sky. On that day, the high priestess had an enormous mass of believers converting, a situation that put a smile on her face. On the 4th day, there was another shock, but this time, in entertainment culture. Several works that had been lost due to doomsday returned to humanity. The emperor's wife, the dragon goddess, Pepper Elderblood, enthusiastically returned culture to the world. And many could not help but notice that several works, such as that of a certain green-eyed wizard, a blonde-haired ninja, and a certain sci-fi fantasy with a lightsaber, had no sequels. They had a perfect ending that respected the original old work but had a few small things changed. The blonde ninja actually became the village chief after defeating the villain with eye problems, thus creating a good family and being a present father to his 2 daughters. The green-eyed wizard stayed with his friend, knowing everything, and had the family he always wanted. The hero who fell into darkness was laid to rest next to his beloved, a sad ending for the former hero, but more emotional. In the end, he returned to being the hero he once was, even if only for a few minutes. These changes were clearly an intentional gesture that left many men and women in tears of happiness. The return of adult drawings. That same day, was something very celebrated, even more than some of the small changes in these works. Of course, just as there were completely excluded. Oh, the tentacles were also excluded. Women and men were so happy that they started calling Pepper the goddess of culture, art, and passion. Goddess of culture and art, I can understand, but why the goddess of passion? Jean asked her sisters as she looked at the update feed. Well, because of her huge badonkas. Maria deduced. The girls looked at Pepper, precisely speaking, towards her, badonkas, batten/o/vel/b/jn.c//om. Quivered with minimal effort. Makes sense. Several said, nodding their heads. Mao. Stop talking nonsense. As if some of you have any right to talk about breasts. Some of you are the same size as me. They're calling me that because I brought hentai back. It's not something to be happy about. Pepper fumed. Originally, the titles they wanted to call her were Goddess of Otakus, Goddess of hentai, or something like that. But out of fear of the emperor, after all, they were talking about his wife, everyone instinctively called her the goddess of culture, art, and passion. Are you a cow by any chance? Why are you shouting Mao around here? Lakis retorted as she slapped her sister's assets. Kya, don't slap me there. While the more modern people applauded Pepper, the older ones applauded Sienna. After all, just like her sister, she had also brought culture back. But it was ancient culture, the arts of ancient artists, such as the Mona Lisa, that was lost on the Day of Judgment, original classical music, the original scriptures that were lost, and various historical objects of humanity that were also restored. Just like Pepper, Sienna also gained titles such as Goddess of Art, Goddess of Knowledge, and Goddess of Culture. Titles that Sienna didn't particularly care about since it was not like these were a divine concept. It was just people talking nonsense. Remember, Sienna, faith has power, Aphrodite warned when she realized what Sienna was thinking. When thousands of mortal beings gather and pray to a being with a certain concept in mind, that God can awaken that divinity. Because of this, Victor is completely controlling our public appearances to have the intended effect. Jean appearing at that time in the sky of the entire empire and healing everyone was not a deliberate move by Jean. It was by Victor's order, as he was cultivating future divinities for his wives. Darling is scary. Every action he takes has 3 or 4 reasons behind it. Sienna sighed. Aphrodite just laughed a little. On the 5th day, there was another shock. A planet was colonized. Everyone, regardless of race, went to the television to watch the news from the Empire, and if this were a cartoon, everyone would have their eyes wide open and their mouths falling to the floor due to the absurdity of what they were hearing. It wasn't only one planet, but 3 planets were completely conquered. Alien civilizations they had never seen before were seen on TV, and the efforts of the Empire's elite soldiers in the peaceful retaking of control of these planets. Seeing the Dragonoids, with their absurd height, killing alien monsters, something that could only be seen in sci-fi, made the children look on in admiration and the older ones in fear. Once again, the fear and admiration of the Emperor grew throughout the population. On the 6th day, nothing major happened. The repercussions of the news from the previous days were still fresh in everyone's minds, and all anyone could talk about was this. On the 7th day, another event occurred that completely shook the hearts of the citizens, in this case, specifically the conquered gods. The Emperor, Victor Elderblood, marched with all his military power except for the most special ones like his Leviathans, or those he considered a trump card that no one should know about. Seeing those gigantic warships, fully armed demons, Dragonoids, the Emperors, elites, and dragons flying in the sky made the hearts of the gods tremble in pure terror. Any spark of thoughts of revenge died there instantly. That kind of strength was not normal. The Emperor clearly stood above everyone. In the march, everyone's eyes were focused on the 2 thrones that stood atop a ceremonial ship with shades of black and violet, Emperor Victor Elderblood and Empress Violet Elderblood in their 5-meter-tall forms. The words, true God, applied completely to these 2. Their very presence was overwhelming, even though they weren't even exerting their pressure, and they were supernaturally beautiful, to a level that if you looked at them, you couldn't look away anymore. There were no speeches that day, just a ceremonial parade that showed the power of the Empire. Speeches were not necessary for everyone to understand the unspoken message, which even those too dumb to read between the lines understood. The future from today on was commanded by the Emperor, and if there was one thing that these 7 days showed, it was that the Emperor was extremely competent at what he did. He was so competent that this level of competence was frightening. In the space of 7 days, he'd completely captured all those beings and extinguished possible flames of rebellion. The image of a conquering god appeared in the minds of mortals, as did this very title. It's all about image and demonstration. The rest will come naturally. Now begins the fusion of the Empire with these different beings that were conquered in a short time. It's time to pay a visit to my wife, Natalia. Victor thought as he felt internally satisfied upon seeing and hearing everyone's reaction. He was even more satisfied when he heard the titles that the mortals were giving him. Who knows, maybe some of these titles will give me and Violet another divinity. Victor thought. Titles like the Queen of the Gods, Gods Among Gods, and Conquering God echoed through the minds of the mortals. At the end of the 7th day of the 1st year of the imperial calendar, the Dragon Emperor, Victor Elderblood, became an overlord of his sector. He was the strongest force in his sector, and it was only a matter of time until all the planets would be annexed to the Empire. Edited by Davo 21. Time heals everything. A phrase that is usually said to another person when someone is going through difficult times, whether personal, financial, or romantic. But these words did not apply to everyone, at least, not for beings with a lifespan as long as the gods. Gods were made in a peculiar way and worked differently. Their perception of time seemed much slower than that of other races. 100 years for a human was an enormous amount of time for them. 100,000 years for a god was not a big deal. Usually, these beings tended to remain unchanged for longer than that. Just look at the classic examples of the Greek pantheon, whose gods maintained the same personality even after thousands of years. A stagnant society. This was the way to describe the society of the gods. Beings, no matter what type, whether mortal or not, grow with interactions and exposure to something different. Aphrodite began her process of change when she met Adonis, and as the story unfolded, she decided to travel to the various pantheons of Earth. Through this journey, she met different types of people and learned about other cultures. She grew for the first time as both a person and as a goddess. She experienced the change that humans in their rushed societies experienced almost daily. This was an excellent example of how a god could change. Victor understood this, and by understanding this, he was advancing his integration plan. As he walked through the imperial palace built in his personal domain, Victor and Roxanne listened to Kagaya's reports, and, like him, she was also in her goddess form. As described previously, the goddess form or emperor and empress form was nothing more than their tallest forms, roughly 4 to 5 meters tall. Depending on the occasion, Victor could assume up to 7 to 10 meters in height, as a means of conveying the divine feeling to mortals. After all, image was everything. Victor was currently 5 meters tall, and Kagaya was 4.5 meters tall. Sister Velnora began her conquest with enthusiasm, and the Milky Way has practically been completely mapped, and we found traces of several world trees. Growing. As ordered, we immediately settled on the planets with life, and acquired the consciousness of the world trees. They will grow with their sisters now. Roxanne, who was the same height as Kagaya, said, "In the city of world trees, we've received 300 seedlings and 3 more developed sisters." The city of world trees, a fancy name for a place that was nothing more than a small village whose population was made up entirely of world trees located on Victor's personal planet. The world trees were the source of life on the planet, so taking care of them was essential, and eventually, all of them would connect with Victor. This way, it would be easier to organize his entire domain, and with this connection, Victor would be able to protect the planets under his domain more easily. A job that only someone with a soul as abnormal as Victor's could handle. After all, the pressure of one world tree was already great, but hundreds of them? It was surreal. But for Victor, it wasn't a problem. Not only did he have an abnormal soul, but he also had Roxanne and Amara managing everything. What is the progress for the appearance of their counterparts? The world trees of negativity will take a long time to be born. Most of them are just seedlings in development. Any sentient being will take thousands of years to be born naturally. The world tree of positivity was born first. It was the one that nourished the planet. And life on the planet. After a while, when sentient life appeared, the world tree of negativity would be born to manage the more spiritual side of the planet. It was a balance that was repeated on all planets without exception. It was one of the fundamental rules of the universe enforced by the primordial of life, the universal tree. After conquering and completely mapping the Milky Way, Sister Velnora will join Sister Rose and Eleanor in conquering the planet. By the time she gets there, Eleanor and Rose will probably have already conquered everything. That's true. We predict that their next course of action is to go to the other galaxies around them and continue their expansion. But we found a problem. Our sector is too big for so few people, right? Yes. And with the imminent arrival of the upper sectors, we predict that some of the nearby galaxies will be taken over by factions from the upper sectors. Even with our clone technology, we can't populate that many planets. We need more people. Victor nodded. He had already foreseen that this would be an issue. Normally, this wouldn't be a problem, as the middle sectors took billions of years to enter the upper sectors. Take Velnora, for example. In her former empire, there were hundreds of conquered worlds that were fully developed. In comparison, this sector was simply too young. This entire process of evolution was being advanced simply because of the presence of Victor and his faction. He alone was pushing the entire sector to evolve. Victor was like a whale in a small lake. His existence was simply too big to fit in. Victor's presence was so great that the universe itself limited his movement. For example, with all his strength now, he cannot go and visit the underworld that is the home of the witches. But as always, Victor knew how to get around these limitations. If he couldn't go at full strength, he could simply create a conscious clone with fewer divinities, and send it there. The result would be the same. The conquest of the witches' home planet was essential to understanding how the universe worked. We must protect our home. All the galaxies near the Milky Way will have to be completely conquered. We will form a line of defense for future wars. We will divide the planet into functions, agricultural planets, construction/mining planets, and storage planets. Outposts will also be essential. We need to expand our clone factories as well to produce at least 100 million clones every year. Are these planets really necessary? Can't you just create materials? Kagaya asked. Yes, that is true, but we must not take the work out of the hands of mortals. Victor said and then added, beings need to work to live, and they need a daily routine. Knowing that everything can be obtained easily breeds laziness and stagnation. Not to mention that beings value what is earned more than what is easily given. A man will never forget a car he suffered for and fought to obtain, while a car that was casually given to him would be appreciated less. Victor understood this very well. If there is a shortage of resources, the Empire can always send more. We are providing everything for now, but when the Empire's bases are ready, I will stop providing for them, and they will be the ones to provide them. Work for the Empire and be rewarded, Roxanne muttered. Victor nodded at his wife's words. NOVLB //JNN. Do you intend to provide power increases like you did with the demons? Yes, but only to those who gain a certain level of loyalty. Strength increase rewards will only be available to citizens who reach G2 in trust levels. This will cause dissatisfaction. Beings are always dissatisfied. It is in our nature. Victor spoke naturally. I have given many tools to increase their power, the Tower of Nightmares being a perfect example. I intend to place one of these towers in every mega city. The power increase reward must be something exclusive and unique, something that I only give for a great deed. Along with the Tower of Nightmares, technology, medicine, supernatural matters like ruins, everything is accessible to those who make the effort. Even an ordinary human can transform into a superhuman capable of dealing with an adult vampire, thanks to my support. I gave them the tools. It's up to them to use them. Beings are fools, darling. A good example of this is the internet. Such a powerful tool for knowledge that is only used for memes and watching porn, Roxanne said. I know that laziness and lack of motivation are some of the factors, but I intend to deal with them. In fact, the one who will deal with this is Hestia, who will make the new generations more hardworking. After all, people will always see superheroes with incredible powers, and they will always wonder if one day they can be like them. This very thought will generate motivation. And the fear of failure. After all, the Empire does not need useless people. Darling, I realize that most of our current problems are caused by a lack of time. Maybe we should slow down. In less than 100 years, the barrier of the upper sectors will disappear, and this entire group of galaxies that form the sector where Victor lived will be part of a cluster of larger galaxies. The race against time was making everyone work to the maximum in several areas. But there was still not enough time. Introducing new concepts of technology, science, and ideologies to a group of conquered beings required time. The change could not be too abrupt, too fast, or too slow, but must be at the right pace. Unfortunately, they did not have that time. That is not possible. I intend to have this entire sector conquered for future wars. Kagaya and Roxanne sighed. They had a long job ahead of them, but they couldn't do anything since Victor's orders were absolute. As his wives, they could advise him and give him new perspectives, but at the end of the day, the Emperor's decision was how the Empire moved. Victor smiled slightly. Don't worry, I've already thought of a solution to this problem. Kamen looked at Davan for information. Davana Ayat shook her hand, coving. She didn't know anything. Due to the constant flow of new, sister, world trees, she was too busy managing them all and ensuring their safety, as well as their survival. After all, being removed from their planet in such a young state was dangerous. They needed energy to survive, and the ones providing that energy were Roxanne and Amara. This means it was Victor, too, considering that the two were part of Victor's soul. As they passed through a large door, the group saw several familiar faces. Scathach, Dunscaith, Albedo and her daughter Evie, Ruby, Hephaestus, Aphrodite, Jean, Yggdrasil, Hela, Violet, and last but not least, Natalia, the big MVP of this situation.